My name is Byron Lunds. I'll be hosting this meeting this afternoon. Welcome to the Ambassadors Forum and to this breakout session. Our speaker for this hour is Roy Swart, and he's going to be speaking on the war between science and the Bible. Roy has a Bachelor of Science degree in mechanical engineering from MIT. His day job is working in the semiconductor industry, but his real passion is Jesus. So Roy leads the Ambassadors Forum and hosts a radio show every Saturday on 8 a.m. on KPDQ. So let me open with a quick word of prayer, and I'll turn it over to Roy. Father, I want to thank you for the gift of technology, which allows us to gather in this amazing manner from locations everywhere around the world and to hear important and useful information, which will increase our faith and strengthen our resolve to live for you. Thank you for Roy. Bless him as he speaks. Give him clarity of thought and give us understanding. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.
Roy, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Byron. So for those of you who just heard my plenary talk an hour or two ago, there's going to be some overlap. So I'm assuming that, boy, it just got a lot bigger for me. I'm assuming that you're here because you're interested in the topic of science. So this is the right place to be. Let me see if let me share here. So Byron, are you going to be the one going back from my picture of me to the slides?
No, that'll happen when you share your screen.
Okay. So how does that look there? Can you see
Perfect.
that? Okay,
Perfect.
and you can still see me or however much you need
Yes.
to? Okay.
Yes.
All right, well, let's get started. I don't have it here. Okay, 12:03. All right, well, I'm here to talk about the war between science and the Bible. And I want to start with a few questions. Who here has encountered this topic in your daily conversations with your coworkers, with your family, with your friends? Something where somebody says something like, well, the Bible isn't very scientific, or isn't Christianity anti-science? Or, well, science is reliable, but the Bible is just myths and fairy tales. Or hasn't science already disproven the Bible? So if you've had an experience something like that, this talk is for you. I'm going to spend try to be about 30, 35 minutes going through some slides. And then I want to leave the last 15 to 20 minutes for your questions. So we'll do some open Q&A at the end. All right, so let me go to the first slide. All right, here's my illustration. I feel like we as Christians are in a war, and we're the ones with like an M16 machine gun, and our enemy has something like a butter knife. And the first thing that we do is we run out into the battlefield and we give him our machine gun and he drops the butter knife. So if you like, well, that sounds crazy. Why would anybody ever do that? I don't know, but that's what Christians are doing on this topic of science and the Bible. We have all the strength of argument. All of the facts are on our side. But what we're doing is we're surrendering. Even before the battle starts, we are surrendering and saying, you know what? Maybe science is against the Bible. Maybe science is against Christianity. And we're losing before we even start. This is typically what's happening. And so what I want to do is go through some slides today and say, how can we understand as Christians that science is really a Christian institution? And so hopefully we'll accomplish that in these next minutes together. So I have a few key messages today. The first key message is that science is God's invention. You don't need to be afraid of this. You'll actually find that science is one of the strongest arguments for the existence of God and for the reliability of the Bible. I want to go through 3 main points. The first is that the biblical description of reality is the only worldview that is consistent with science. Number 2, science is great at what it does, but its scope is very limited. And as I've discussed, obviously, the third point is that science in the Bible are not in opposition. Now, I'll give you a little bit of background on myself. I don't want to spend a lot of time here, but this is a picture of MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts. It's kind of an aerial view of the dome. I got my bachelor's of mechanical engineering from there. A quick little story about how I got there. So I got pretty good grades in high school and did really well in math and science. But I didn't really, I grew up in a really small community. And so I wasn't sure what I wanted to do after high school. I always enjoyed making things, building things, rebuilding engines on cars, things like that. And so my dad said, well, what are you going to do after college? And I said, well, I don't know, maybe I'll be a carpenter or a mechanic or a plumber, something like that. And he said, well, you got pretty good grades in high school. Why don't you, try and go to college and, study some technical field or something like that. And so being naive, I said, you know what, I don't know much about beyond those things I just mentioned. But from what I've heard, and I certainly don't want to do just, academic stuff. I like getting my hands dirty. I like making things. So I said, I think that's called an engineer. And engineers, like, they learn about math and science, but they actually do stuff. So I said, all right, Dad, I'll make you a deal. You find the best engineering college, I'll apply to it. And if I get in, I'll go to college. I'll do what you want me to do. And if I don't get in, get off my back. I'll be a carpenter or a mechanic or something like that when I work with my hands. So long story short, I applied to MIT. I got in. And so I was obligated by that promise to my dad to finish my degree. So that's a little bit about how I got there. My first job was at Intel. I ended up designing robots and machines to make computer chips. I did that for about 20 years, and now I'm at a different company doing the same thing. A quick little story about that. I was sitting in my dorm room at college, and the phone rang. This is back before cell phones. You can imagine that. So the phone rang, and somebody said, hey, I'm so-and-so. I'm from Intel Corp. So remember, my background, my degree was in mechanical engineering. So I thought I'd work at somewhere like Boeing or Pratt & Whitney, something like that. The guy says, hey, this is so-and-so from Intel. Can I ask you a few questions? And I said, Intel? Don't you guys like make computers or something like that? He said, yeah. I said, I'm not interested. He said, well, hold on. Let me just ask you a couple of questions, about, see if you can figure out some hard problems. And I love a challenge. So I said, sure, go ahead. So he asked me a couple of questions, and he's like, wow, you really know your stuff. I'd like to fly you out for an interview. And I said, an interview? Like, I already told you, like, I'm not interested. You guys make computer chips. What am I going to do? I want to go make like tanks and, bulldozers and stuff like that. And I said, but wait a minute, where are you located? And he said, Chandler, Arizona. And I said, you know what? I have an aunt in Sierra Vista. I think that's a couple of hours south of Phoenix. Tell you what, you fly me out there. I'll do the interview. You give me a rental car and, all the free gas that I want. I'll go down and visit my aunt for a couple of days, and we'll call it a deal. So they did. I got the job. It ended up being completely different than what I thought. Like, we had a machine shop. We were building robots. So it all worked out. A little bit about what I did at Intel. I'm going to probably skip this slide. If you don't know what anything about semiconductors, how computer chips are made. Phenomenal, fascinating thing. I've been doing it now for almost 25 years. Super cool. I love it. Here's actually a factory within Intel. And it's got a lot of automation, people doing stuff. I ended up getting down into the very kind of micro scale of testing the wafers that we produce. There's a little bit about a company that I'm with now. Kind of a little fun fact up here in this picture right here in the upper left, there's actually, so it's a bunch of automations and machines and robots. There's actually something that I invented and got a patent on in that picture. But if I told you what it was, I'd have to kill you. So it's kind of a secret. All right, back to the topic for today. So let me just get my notes here. All right, the war between science and the Bible. So a little bit more about me. I became a Christian right before I went to college. So all of my formal training on science and math was all done with a biblical worldview. And so I wasn't super educated on that. I didn't understand my faith very well. I'd only been a Christian less than a year. But at least I was submitted to God. I was submitted to the Bible. And so I never had this sort of conflict that my faith and my degree or my career were in conflict. To me, I thought, you know what? God created the universe. He sustains it with a set of orderly rules and governance. And all of creation testifies to the glory and the grandeur of God. But what I found out was a lot of my fellow students, and specifically a lot of the people that I work with today, have a completely different worldview. And so the common misconception is that there is a war between science and the Bible. So that's what we'll talk about. It usually, let's see here, my slides. So to do this, we need to go back and say, well, what is science in the first place? And there's a lot of different definitions for this. I would say science is a system of building knowledge through testable predictions. Okay, a system of building knowledge through testable predictions. It's not all knowledge. It's something that you build through testable predictions. Now, oh, oops, I hopefully didn't see that. I have a question for you guys. Who was the person that is credited with developing the scientific method? Now, Byron, nobody can talk, right? Is it just me, or can we turn on everybody's? That's fine. We'll just, I'm not sure how this Zoom is supposed to work, but I'll give you the answer. So the answer is the scientific method came from a man named Francis Bacon. Now, I want to be precise. The idea of science didn't start with Francis Bacon, but he's the one who kind of formalized it into a method that a lot of people use today. But what he called, so he wrote essentially a book, and he called it the Novum Organum Scientiarum. I'm not sure if I have all right. So that's Latin for a new method of science. So to have a new method of science, you need to have an old method of science. So what was the old method of science that he was trying to challenge? Well, that comes from Aristotle. And it was interesting. Francis Bacon was a Christian. Aristotle was a pagan. And my premise here is that the reason he had to replace Aristotle's thinking about science was not because Aristotle wasn't smart. It's not because he didn't have a good method. It's because his method of science was based on a defunct worldview. So what do I mean by that? Well, Francis Bacon thought about the system of the world, think of it as like founded on a rock, like things didn't change. Whereas Aristotle, his worldview, his religion was that, that there was no solid foundation of a rock. Let me give you an example. Francis Bacon thought God created and sustains the universe. God is the ultimate authority. Reality determines philosophy. Therefore, you should have stable and unchanging laws. So this is the way that Francis Bacon's worldview set the stage for a scientific method. Well, what did Aristotle think? Aristotle believed in an uncreated, eternal universe. We know that's not true today. With the Big Bang, everybody says, you know what? It's not an eternal universe. Nobody, scientists, Christians, atheists, nobody believes in an eternal universe because we have data to contradict that. The other thing he thought was human reason is the ultimate authority, that philosophy determines reality. So he didn't have this idea of experiments as a way of finding out the way God made the world. What they thought was the mind was the source of reality. And so it was all thought based. And so really, if you looked at Aristotle's system that he could work with because of his worldview, because of his religion, there were unfounded laws that could change. So that worldview could never spawn the scientific method. So Francis Bacon comes along and says, you know what? I'm going to formalize and codify a biblical worldview into science. All right, there's of our three main points. The first one we had, which is the biblical description of reality, is the only worldview that is consistent with science. We just covered that. The next thing I want to talk about is what is science? What's the scientific method? And I described this in my plenary talk, but now we'll kind of flesh it out a little bit more. Number one is make an observation. Make an observation about the world around you. I've heard some people, actually, one of my kids in their class recently, somebody said, science starts by asking a question. That's not true. That's not science. That's knowledge. So if I said, you know what, I wonder how many socks are in my sock drawer. That'd be asking a question, but I wouldn't be, that's not science. I would just walk over to my sock drawer, pull it out, 7 socks, and I'm done. That's not science. That's knowledge. So the first step in the scientific method is make an observation about the world around you. Second is propose an explanation. I wonder why that thing that I observed happened. Number 3 is create a prediction. Okay, if I'm right about my guess as to why that thing happened, then this other thing should happen. Then you collect data to see if the results match your predictions. You're like, if I'm right, the data should be this. Then you go collect the data. And then the last one is modify your hypothesis to better match the data, which starts to bring in, you start to develop a theory. So let's actually try this out. It's a little hard on this Zoom call. Usually if I'm face-to-face, it's easier, but let's say I take this, let me see here. So I got my window right here. Let's say I take this bottle. It's gonna be hard on this little screen, but let's say I take this bottle and I drop it. What would be my observation? My observation would be when I'm holding a bottle of water and I let go, it goes down towards the floor. Okay, that's my observation. Now I would make a guess. I wonder why that happens. And I'd say, I don't know, maybe there's some weird law in the universe that all plastic bottles are attracted to carpeted floors. So no matter what happens, if you ever let a plastic bottle do what it wants to do, it's going to go towards a carpeted floor as fast as it can. Okay, that's my explanation. That's my guess. Then I would create a prediction. I would say, hey, if I walked over to the other side of the room where there's also carpeted floor and I drop the bottle, it would fall to the floor. So that's my prediction. Then I go collect data and I'd walk over there and I'd let go of the bottle. And what would it do? It would fall straight to the carpeted floor. And then I would say, perfect, got a new law. Plastic bottles in the universe are, for some reason, attracted to carpeted floors. Now, you keep collecting data and you say, all right, well, that was on that side of the room. What if I do it on this side of the room? What if I do it over here? What if I take a bigger bottle? What if I take a smaller bottle? And I'm like, whoa, every plastic bottle always goes to the carpeted floor. So I have a new theory, right? Hold on. Let's say I take this outside on the grass. And I say, well, when I let go of this plastic bottle, it's going to fly inside and go to the carpet because that's where it wants to go. So then I do this and I drop it and it just falls down towards the grass. And I say, darn it, I guess my theory is incomplete. That is science. I try it with a water bottle. I try it with, well, maybe not a cell phone. You wouldn't want to drop that, but I drop different things. And then over time, you get better and better at explaining the things that you've observed in nature. That is science. So now, believe it or not, you probably know, if you followed that quick little illustration, you probably know more about what science really is, maybe than 3/4 of the people in the world or in the United States or whatever. People think, oh, well, science is just knowledge. Science is this, science is that. No, it's exactly what I just said. Make an observation, make a guess, see if you're right, make a prediction, see if you're right. That's science. Now, what I want to explain is very simple thing, right? You're like, okay, so what? Plastic bottles, fall down. That's gravity. It's not that hard. This is what's fascinating. And I think this is what confuses a lot of people about science, is they say, okay, so what? Science is so simple. You observe something, you make a guess, you make a prediction, you collect some data. That's so simple. Like, that's not very powerful. Let me tell you a little bit about the CERN. So who here has heard of the CERN? It's called I can't remember, in French or something, it's CERN. It's the European Organization for Nuclear Research, and it has the largest particle physics laboratory in the world. There's one small part of the CERN. There's a guy, hard hat on, all that crazy, cool, awesome stuff in the background. That's one tiny piece of the CERN. It's for doing experiments on nuclear particle physics. Now, we'll zoom out again. Okay. See that? Look at the bottom. See that little guy down here with the white hard hat? Gives you a picture of the scale of this thing. Giant, massive, as big as a house. Okay. Now, so that's just one piece of it. It's actually a huge tunnel. It's a 17-mile circumference tunnel. I think it's basically what they do is they spin up particles and then they go around in this really complicated infrastructure. They go around, vroom, 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 going faster and faster and faster and faster. And then, wham, they smash into each other. And then when they smash into each other, they have a huge detector. Think of it like this. Think of it like a little paintball. Think of an atom like a little paintball, and it's zooming around. And then another atom, and then they come and they smash into each other and they make a huge splat, okay? They've got this huge detector system that's basically measuring what the splat of an atom looks like. And they're doing this over and over and over again, really fast. And they're collecting all that data and analyzing it and saying, oh, we spun it like this, we spun it like this. It was this atom, it was that atom. What does the splat look like? Well, what's fascinating is they didn't have enough computer, I think it's Switzerland. They didn't have enough computer power in that area to analyze all the data that they're collecting fast enough. So what they had to do is they had to build a huge network of computers all across the world. So they're like, atom splat, send it out for data analysis. Atom splat, send it out for data analysis. Atom splat, send it out for data analysis. So super cool, like mind blowing, like, wow, how are they, that's amazing. You know why that's possible? What made that possible is science. Make an observation, make a guess, make a prediction, check to see if you're right, repeat. So super powerful concept, but it's very, very simple. Now, another thing that I think people get wrong or get confused about science is they say, goodness, it can like send people to the moon and do things like the CERN, so it can probably do anything, right? Well, no, it's very limited in scope. So let's think about the things that it can't do. So if it starts with making an observation, well, the only kind of knowledge that it can determine is something that's observable. Is everything observable? No. What about this? You have to create a prediction and then test it. So it has to be testable. What about this? You have to collect data to see if your results match your prediction. So it has to be measurable. And we could go on and on and on through many things, but for the sake of time today, the point is this: science is useful, but it has a very narrow scope. So things like history, or or purpose. Why am I here? Why is anything here? What should I do with my life? What's it okay to do? Morality. All these things. Science can't answer those things. So just a quick little graphic I put together about the scope of what knowledge, of the kind of knowledge science can discover. So here's all knowledge. We'll call that the orange circle of all knowledge. Okay. Already, science can only discover things about the material world. Okay. Now it's even less. Within the material world, it can only discover things about the observable world and testable world and measurable, and it keeps going down, down, down. And actually the blue circle is the circle of all knowledge. What science can know, the orange part, is actually really, really limited. It's powerful and it can do amazing things, but the scope of knowledge of science is actually very limited. All right, so we've talked about the fact that science actually needs a biblical worldview to function. Now we've talked about the fact that, hey, science is really, really cool, but the scope is really limited. Now let's talk about the fact, well, the conclusion there is science and the Bible aren't really in opposition at all. There's nothing that we've talked about making an observation, testing it. There's nothing in there that opposes the Bible at all. So there's this misconception that science and the Bible are in opposition. So where do I think, what time we got? Oh, we're doing fine on time. We'll have lots of time for questions and answers at the end here, so we can go back. Shouldn't have had that fourth cup of coffee. All right, so if there's no, we just walked through science, okay? That is science. And we could spend an hour or a week or a year going through all the examples of all the different disciplines of science and what it's used for. But what I just described there, those 5 steps, that is the essence of what science is. So you might be saying, okay, then where are people getting this idea that science and the Bible are in opposition? They don't seem like they're in opposition at all. So where does this come from? Here's my guess. My guess is that Christians especially scientists and engineers, or really anybody in a technical field, haven't pushed back on the culture enough when these things are asserted. So somebody out there says, well, I mean, duh, of course, science has disproven the Bible. And when a Christian scientist or a Christian in a technical field doesn't stand up and say, what are you talking about? What's the conflict between science and the Bible? And they say, well, obviously, I mean, it's just so obvious. Well, no, it's not just so obvious. Why don't you walk me through, this is what science is, this is what the Bible is. Why don't you walk me through where the opposition is? Because Christians haven't felt confident in doing that, a lot of people have believed a lie. A lot of people have felt like they don't want to risk being ridiculed or made fun of or ganged up on. And so they don't say anything. Even though they have the truth on their side, they don't say anything. And I think it's sad. I think it's really unfortunate. So and again, we can cover this in the Q&A if you want, but I think there are also examples of some poor arguments that Christians give about the Bible or about science that just add to the confusion. So I think that the solution is this: all Christians, especially those in technical fields where these discussions are happening all the time, okay? I have a discussion about science in the Bible every day of work. And I've worked for almost 25 years. So you do the math, 6,000 days of my career, probably just about every day, I have some kind of conversation with somebody at work about, but science in the Bible, there's some opposition. So it is, you don't have to go looking for this. You can't hide from it. It is everywhere. So Christians, we need to accurately represent our faith as the Bible describes it. The Bible never teaches that we should have a blind faith. The Bible never teaches that we can't believe in science. In fact, just the opposite. Let me give you the graphic's terrible, but the information is correct. So I'm going to make a little rubric here of irrational and rational on the left, and unbelief and belief on the top. Okay, so what do we call irrational? Let me say it this way: what does the Bible call irrational unbelief? It's just crazy thinking, and you don't believe in God. The Bible calls that foolishness. Okay, what do you call rational unbelief? The Bible calls that rebellion against God. Okay? What does the Bible call irrational belief? And by irrational, I mean it's not reasonable. It's not justifiable. It's not logical. You might believe, but you don't have any rational justification for it. What does the Bible call that? Well, not exactly this word, but the Bible would describe that as blind faith. Now, what do you call rational belief? The Bible calls that biblical, or explains that as biblical Christianity. Here's the point. Everybody knows, all Christians know that unbelief is bad. Okay? God says, hey, unbelief, not okay. Here's the sad part. A lot of Christians think that irrational belief is okay, but it's not. The Bible condemns blind faith. It never says, hey, you know what? All the evidence is over here, but you know what? You just have to believe contrary to the evidence, contrary to logic, contrary to reason. You just need to believe anyway. That's a blind faith, and the Bible condemns that. The only thing the Bible supports and condones is biblical Christianity, rational belief. All right. I think I am going to end in about 2 minutes. So really quick practical application. If I gave you one suggestion, okay, ask questions. Anytime that you hear something, anytime that you're in a conversation with someone, your biggest method is to ask questions. Again, as I said in my plenary talk earlier today, it's not to try to fool people or to try and outmaneuver people or do a chess game. When you ask questions, you get closer and closer to the truth. So ask questions. And my last point here is I want to share a little bit more about my testimony, and that is this is how I would describe my career and what God has done with me or through me. What has given me a platform in my evangelism to my colleagues has not been my arguments, but my achievements in the business world. Okay, so am I open about my faith at work all the time? Do I tell people that I'm a Christian? Of course. Do I pray for people and make it known that I believe in the Bible? Of course. But to my secular colleagues, that's not convincing. So what? So I'm a nice guy. So I believe in the Bible. That wouldn't mean anything to them if I didn't have my achievements in the business world. So what does that look like? It looks, or I think this just describes it a little bit more. God has blessed me in my career, which has given me a credibility among my peers that makes them think. So it looks something like this. The typical presupposition in atheism is God is not real, so Christianity is bogus. Second step, since Christianity is bogus, people who believe it, called Christians, must be stupid. Roy is successful in an intellectually rigorous and demanding environment, therefore Roy's pretty smart. Roy's a Christian. Wait a minute, that doesn't compute. So then they walk through it again, at least subconsciously. God's not real, Christianity is bogus, Roy's successful, Roy's a Christian? Wait a minute, God's not real, Christianity is bogus, what? And so what happens is they finally say, you know what, Roy, and this has happened so many times. I'll give you one quick example. I was on a plane ride. We were taking a trip, a fellow colleague and I, he's not a Christian. I sat down, I opened the Bible and I'm reading it. He comes and he sits down next to me and he says, what are you doing reading the Bible? So we didn't have that much of a relationship. So we're kind of getting to know each other. So he hadn't seen me at work too much. So he's like, what are you doing reading the Bible? And I said, well, I'm a Christian. And he literally said, you're too smart to be a Christian. And it opened the door for like, wait a minute, I thought Christianity is all about blind faith. It's about not being logical and reasonable and rigorous. So why are you a Christian? And what it did is it opened the door to some phenomenal conversations, because he could say, wait a minute, something doesn't make sense about what I'm observing. I think Christianity is for idiots, but here you are, obviously not an idiot, but you're a Christian. Help me understand what that does. Now, the final application is this. Not all of you are scientists and engineers in the technical field or whatever. Just wherever God has placed you, whatever gifts God has given you, whatever talents he's given you, whatever interests and passions he's given you, do the best with those. If you excel in your field, wherever that is, it will make people notice and they'll say, wait a minute, what's different about you? I want to hear about your faith, and it'll open the door for you to share what you believe and why you believe it, and you'll have a great conversation. All right, that is my whole talk. We have 10 minutes left. So Byron, can we open it up for questions, or what do we do now?
Yes, we've got a couple of questions in the chat. You could probably open the chat and see them yourself.
Okay. I could allow, oh, that's you. You may send questions. Is political science and social science misnamed? That's a great question.
Note also there's a comment below that from Bo Robertson. He sort of answered it too. So take all of those together.
Yes and no. There is a sort of system to it and also an unpredictability. Okay. Is it the same person?
He's
So-
replying to Maribel.
Okay. So here's what I would say. And I don't know a whole lot about political science and social science. I know there's some like hard sciences, soft sciences. Again, science is what I described. You make an observation, you make a guess, you create a prediction, see if you're right. So if that is done in political science or social science, yeah, that'd be fine. You can call them sciences. But if you're just like, hey, it's just knowledge. I'm not. So here's a good example. Math. Math isn't a science. Is it really technical? Is it really logical? Sure, but it's not science. So you can't call math science. So if in political science you say, hey, I'm watching political trends and I'm making observations and I'm making a guess and then I'm seeing if I'm right. Yeah, I don't see any reason why political science and social science couldn't be sciences. Now, one thing about the hard sciences is that you are depending on laws that don't change. Okay, the law of gravity, electromagnetism, light theory, all these kinds of things, mechanics. If political science has a fundamental assumption of, well, human behavior is like this, but it's not, it's like, well, it's not always like that, but it's typically like that. Well, then that's going to be tough to be able to do science. If the fundamental laws, if you're like, people always, whatever, buy low and sell high. People always are afraid of, tyranny. People, there might be some things that make doing science in a field where there's no fundamental assumptions that are always govern behavior completely. Then I could see how that could be a soft science where you're like, hey, I'm doing things where I'm observing, I'm making guesses, I'm seeing if I'm right, but the laws that I'm trying to base on aren't quite 100%. So I don't think that means you couldn't be successful. You just have to be careful with drawing conclusions and the certainty.
Okay, good. So I see a raised hand from Sohan D'Souza. I think he wants to ask a question. I'm going to see if we can unmute him.
Hello, Roy.
Hello.
Yeah, thanks for the talk.
Yeah.
Regarding the about the Bible being compatible with science, and specifically things like, for example, the sun stopping in the day during when Joshua was fighting the battle, and things like that, or also alternatively, like Gideon or Elijah,
Sure.
when they wanted evidence, like to demonstrate that God existed, they had, in the case of Gideon, something appearing wet and everything around it being dry. In the case of Elijah. So I'm just wondering, like, why is that not available as something we can do right now to demonstrate God's existence to skeptics?
Yeah, let me take a shot at it. And if I don't quite get the sense of your question, let's keep dialoguing. Let me make one point first. I know, and this might not be your question, I'm not implying it is, but it's making me think of it. I've heard a lot of Christians say, man, I really struggle with, whatever it is, a worldwide flood, or Jonah being swallowed by a whale, or Gideon, or, or the sun going backwards. How could that happen? And I'm like, well, verse number 1 in the Bible, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. So as a Christian, you're already, the number one miracle in the Bible, by orders of magnitude, by an infinite number of orders of magnitude, is that God created everything from nothing. Once you're like, yep, that's what God has revealed. Everything else is like, well, why couldn't he? Why couldn't God, turn back the earth or turn back the sun 10 degrees? Did he actually move the earth? Did he keep it from spinning? Who knows? But at that point, it's like, it's not a big deal for us to believe that God, now the why, why did God do it exactly that way? Did he really have to cover all the mountains? Couldn't he have just done, sure, he could have done a lot of different ways. Why questions are really tough with God. But could he have? Of course, God can do anything. Once you say God created everything from nothing, everything else just pales in comparison. Now, I think your question was, why don't we have access to those things today? Well, one, we're not God. So we can't just say, hey, I'm going to decide to move the sun back 10 degrees, or I'm going to choose to make the fleece wet here and dry here. So I don't think we ever had the power of making it happen. It was God's will at the time. Elijah and the prophets at on the mountain, when he called down fire and burned up the whole sacrifice. And that wasn't Elijah being like, okay, I got to work it up. I got to work it up. I got to work it up. He's like, I'm going to make this so impossible that it's going to be a very clear demonstration of God's power. God burned up the whole sacrifice. So I think God still has that ability to do it whenever he wants. And I think, in the US, there's so much rebellion against God and so much kind of constraining of who he is and what he could do, that I think, some of that, in terms of demonstrating who God is, even if people saw a miracle today, I think they would try and explain it away. What I've heard in other parts of the world who aren't so quick to dismiss God that way, there still are lots of miracles. So I'll give you one quick example. And this was to this person's credit. A fellow person that I graduated MIT with, we were working at the same place. We were having an evangelistic conversation like this. And he said, similar to what you said, he said, hey, well, if I saw a miracle, then I would believe in God. But other than that, I'm not going to believe. And I challenged him on it. And I said, wait a minute. You're saying if you saw a miracle that you'd believe in God, you'd get rid of your lifestyle, you'd get rid of your worldview, and you'd become a Christian. And he said, if I'm being honest, no, I wouldn't. Even if I saw a miracle, I still wouldn't do that. And I thought, and it was fine. He's a friend of mine. But I thought, you know what? I wonder if God says, you know what? I do these things to demonstrate my power. Acts 17:31 says, Jesus was raised from the dead to prove that he was God. If people are like, you know what, even if God did a miracle in front of me, I still wouldn't believe. I wonder if that, God says, okay, well, then I won't do a miracle in front of you.
Roy, we got 2 minutes.
Does that help, Sohan?
A bit, I guess. I would like to know, surely opportunities for demonstration haven't diminished since the time of Elijah, have they? Or the ability for such demonstrations to change minds haven't diminished, even though they may not convince everyone. They may convince a lot of people.
Yes.
Right.
So we need to wrap up, Roy. You got less than 2 minutes.
Okay, so I would say, and feel free to, if you have further questions, I think they can contact us, Byron, at on the website, info@theambassadorsforum.com, or there's a link or something.
On the website, there's a link, and the email address is question@theambassadorsforum.com.
Okay,
Sure.
yeah, if you want to continue the conversation, I would also say this. God has given us so many things today that are, in my opinion, clear evidence of who he is, that maybe that one tool he has of doing miracles isn't as necessary or persuasive anymore, because we have so many other things that communicate, revelation of God. Okay, thank you for your questions. Thank you for coming today. I want to make sure that you guys understand. So we have about 10 minutes as a break. And then at 1 o'clock, make sure you click on your next breakout session. And then we'll see you again at 3 o'clock for the plenary. Take care.
Great. Thank you, Roy.